So I wanted to make a tutorial video on how to take any kind of model that you've made and textured in Blender and transfer that over to Unity. So if you wanted to make like a video game or an AR project, how you might go about that. There's quite a few steps involved, and I feel like every time I do it, I always forget something. So this assumes that you have at least a little bit of familiarity with Blender and Unity. I'll put timestamps on the screen to show the different chapters of this video. I'm going to show how to bake textures and bake normal maps, which is not like a necessary step, but especially in like, video games or anything that like an app that you don't want to have too much memory taken up by it. This is the kind of stuff that can help you later down the line. So in Blender here, I'm just gonna make a door prop really quickly. So as you can see, I've marked all the important seams, UV unwrapped it, added a relevant texture, which I just got by Googling door texture. Once you finish your model, you've applied all your modifiers, you've hit Control A to apply any kind of transform so that when you transfer things over later, they don't come out all warped. An important step is always to click on that little top right thing that looks like the two circles overlapping, the viewport overlays, and select face orientation. All of the faces that are going to be anywhere that a player or a viewer can see need to be blue. If they're red, that means that the normal is facing the wrong way, and once you transfer that over to Unity, that face will be transparent and they'll be able to see right through it. If there's a face that is somewhere that a player will never end up seeing, you can probably just go ahead and delete it. It'll save you space when you're texturing stuff, and the less faces you need to render later on for no reason, the better. So this model looks okay, it's mostly blue, but if you did need to flip a normal that was red somewhere where it shouldn't be, the way you would undo this is to go into edit mode, select that face, on the top left, go to mesh, go to normals, and just click flip. If you're making something that needs good performance, like an app for a mobile or video game, you might have a model that, while you want it to look like it has a lot of small details, you don't want to actually make the computer render all of those little vertices. A good way to do that is to take an original model that is fairly basic, like in the example of this door, that would just be the cube that makes up the main door. You would duplicate that, and then in the duplicate, you would add in the smaller details. In this case, I'm going to indent the door where the cuts are on the texture. When you do this, you can have Blender calculate the normals in relation to the original model, and then apply a normal map to the first model, so that the shader for the door will render as though the surface is indented there, even though it'll still just be a regular cube. Although there are options in Unity to have an object that, say, has like a roughness mask or a specularity map and all that, I find the only two that you really need to make things look nice in Unity is a regular diffuse map and a normal map. Oftentimes, if you want to make things easy for yourself, you can take a regular texture, like an image texture, and bring it into Photoshop, and there's a setting in there to make a normal map from that, but it's not always terribly accurate. So if you wanted to, like, say in this case, add more details to this door, you would create the more detailed model that has more faces, and you would bake that down into the regular cube door, which is what we'll be bringing into Unity. So when you want to bake a normal map image, or any kind of baking really, this isn't the most intuitive part of Blender. You would have to go into UV editing and then open a new window. Typically I just do it on the top left, and set that window to the shader graph. In the image editor, go ahead and close whatever is open. Create a new image. In this case, I'm calling it door normal to keep it obvious. You don't need the alpha, and just click OK. This will create our canvas that we're going to be printing the normals to. So in the shader editor, go ahead and add an image texture node with the door normal selected and non-color, because any image node that is going to be handling a normal map should probably be set to non-color. Don't hook this up to anything, just select it in the shader editor. Now, first you're going to want to select the detailed door model, then shift select the low poly one, the original cube. Go into the scene manager, make sure the render engine is set to cycles. Go down to bake, go to normal, make sure selected to active is selected. And you can mess around with these settings if you need to. Extrusion is if the detailed model goes outside the bounds of the original low poly model by a little bit. Margin does not need to be that big. Probably 3 would be fine. That's just the margin outside of the UV map of the door where it will print the normals to on your image texture. So that'll take a minute to bake, but you should see it show up in the image editor. Now, once you've done this, you'll notice the image has a little tiny asterisk next to it, the image tab in the image editor. This is because if you don't save this, if Blender crashes, this will be lost forever. So go ahead and save this somewhere relevant. I would normally save it as a JPEG, particularly because we're trying not to take up too much memory. So you can see if you hook up the normal map that we've just printed to our low poly texture, it does give this a very similar impression to the detailed door, but this is better for performance. Okay, so if you're making like a video game or something like that, and you don't want to take up too much memory, the impression you might have is that it's better to use like, big high quality 4K PNGs for all your textures, but that'll take up a lot of space really quickly. It would probably be best if you could take all the individual elements of an object, like in this case, take the door and the frame, and combine both of their textures into one image map. This would make it so that it's just one 1K JPEG that all of the textures would be reading from, which would save a lot of space. Any kind of shader editor changes you've made, if you want to apply those, you'll have to bake the texture. So we're going to go over that now. The first thing you want to do is, so we've already unwrapped both of these objects, the frame and the door, so that they look roughly how we want them to. What we need to do now is go into the vertex manager, the little triangle thing on the right there, and go into UV maps. And for both objects, create a new UV map, which I'm going to call bake for both of them. But make sure the bake map does not render. So the little camera next to it is not the one that is currently selected. UV map is still the one that we want to be seeing in the viewport. But make sure that bake is selected. So then you're going to want to go into UV editor, select both the frame and the door, or whatever objects, in object mode. Shift over to edit mode and make sure all of the faces are selected and UV unwrap that. That way every UV is contained within one map. So, do the whole average island scale and pack islands combo and go ahead and create a new image. Same as the normal map before, just like a 1K image, no alpha. Color doesn't really matter because we're going to be printing over it anyway. I'm going to call it all textures because that's what it's going to be. So for both objects, both the door and the frame, go ahead and add a image texture that is hooked up to the all textures thing, but not actually plugged into the object. But make sure in both shader editors for both objects, the image node is what is currently selected. Go into render properties and set the bake type to diffuse. And the only contributions should be color. Make sure direct and indirect are not selected. Otherwise, the current lighting situation will be influencing it. And this is important. Make sure selected to active is not selected. Unlike normals, if this is selected, things just don't work and I don't know why. So same as before, 3 pixel margin, click bake, wait for that to print out to the all textures, save that image. And this time, because this is the image texture that we're going to be using in Unity, save this image into the Unity assets folder that is automatically created when you create a new Unity project. It's important that you save it there directly because when you transfer the model over, it needs to have that relative path that it was using in Blender to figure out where the image texture is being stored. So we're going to do the same thing now, but for the normals. So I'm going to create a new image texture called all normals and add another image node to both of the shader graphs, which will have all normals selected in it, and make sure that particular image node is selected in the shader graph before going into bake again. Set the bake to normal. Again, do not have selected to active selected, and bake that. That way all of the normals for both the frame and the door are in one place. Again, please, for God's sake, save that inside your Unity folder. It helps to have already made a folder called textures within the assets folder just to keep track of everything. And finally, what you're going to want to do is make it so that the bake UV map is the one that is being rendered by selecting the little camera at the right. Then go ahead and delete the original UV map because we won't be using that anymore. And having two UV maps might confuse Unity. Now, right off the bat, this is going to look weird, but that's only because we've got to plug in our brand new texture that we've just baked, and you can see everything lines up. Oh, really important, after you've done everything with the textures, it's never unsafe to just go ahead to File, External Data, Pack All into .blend. So that way, the relative paths for the image textures are always going to be within reach of the blend file. So quickly, I'm just going to add a little animation here, just to show how you would plug in an animation from a model made in Blender to Unity. I'm just going to have it so that when the game starts, the door opens. So with both the frame and the door selected, I'm going to go into Export, FBX, and the FBX settings that typically you want are, so along the right side, you'll have the options to include selected objects only, which you do want, so limit to selected objects. Under transform, make sure forward is set to Z forward and up is Y up. Under armature, make sure add leaf bones is not selected. I have never had any reason to bring over leaf bones, and it only ever seems to make the models take up more space. Because there is an animation, we are going to have bake animation selected, and then export that FBX directly into the Unity asset folder. So now that we're done in Blender, I'll see you over in Unity in a second. So you can see in this Unity scene, all I've got really is a plane to walk on and a first-person controller to walk around with. You can also see in the bottom left here that I have a models and textures folder inside of the assets. So if I go into models, before dragging the door into the scene, typically you want to go into model, add some kind of mesh compression. Normally I set this to low, and always, I can't think of a situation where you wouldn't want to do this. Make sure generate light map UVs at the bottom there is selected and click apply. Otherwise, any kind of light baking that you do is going to look like crap. If there isn't an animation, don't have import animation selected, but in this case, because there is, we want that selected. And this is the animation here. Currently, I don't like the name, so I'm going to just change it to open and apply that so that I can keep track of what it actually does. And now you can drag it into the scene. Typically, when you do this, there'll be some kind of random transform applied to it that Unity decides for some reason. I don't know why. The scale is often kind of funny, so just go ahead in the inspector, right-click on transform and click reset. This will set it to whatever setting it was on in Blender. In the hierarchy on the left, you're going to want to right-click on the door. You'll see that the little square next to it looks like a packed up box. That's because you need to right-click on it, click prefab, and then click unpack completely. This will make it so that you can make changes to the individual objects that make it up. Because the frame isn't moving, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I click static on the top right of the inspector there. Always set objects to static if they aren't going to be moving. This saves in performance and it helps with light baking. To the overall door object, I'm going to add the animator so that we can apply the animation that we did. So to do this, you want to add an animator component, and then going into your assets, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder that I'm going to call anim, which is going to have all my animation stuff. I'm going to right click and create a new animation controller, which I'm going to call door because it controls the door. So if you double click on that, it'll automatically take you into the animator, which basically says under what conditions an animation should play. Entry is basically when the scene starts, where should it go from there? Should it automatically trigger an animation, or do you want something off to the side that you can trigger with the script? So to bring that animation that we did, the animation called open, you're going to want to go back into the prefabs. And then next to the door, there'll be that little tiny arrow thing. If you click on it, it'll expand all of the elements that are packed within that prefab. And the little triangle, the blue triangle with the speedy lines next to it called open, that is our animation. So if we just drag and drop that into the animator, it'll automatically make it the default animation that is triggered when the game starts. You have the option to change the speed or whether or not this animation is looped, but we're just going to have it play the one time. So going into the scene again, another thing you're going to want to do is go into the door object where the animator is, and go ahead under controller, add in the animator controller called door. And now when we click play, we can see our object. It has the normals, it has the animation. Beautiful. So that's all the main steps that I typically use when I bring something from Blender over to Unity. It can be a bit of a pain in the ass to find all of these separate steps and then have to follow them one by one, which is what I typically do. So if nothing else, then at least all of these steps are collected in one place for future reference. If anything was unclear, which probably was the case, then let me know and I can try to help you or walk through it in the future. So here's hoping this works, and good luck with anything you're doing in Blender and Unity in the future. Unity seems to have been designed specifically to hurt me. So hopefully you'll have more luck with it in the future than I did learning all this.